A healthy Chicago Bears team shouldn't have too much trouble beating the Las Vegas Raiders on Sunday, but the injury report this week suggests they could have some trouble.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1, and you can follow the podcast at Locked On Bears on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and the Locked On Bears YouTube channel, where you can keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And on the show today, I want to look at the mounting list of injuries the Bears keep adding each week and how much of an impact that might have on this game against the Raiders. You know, they've gotten by without a couple of starters, but now as many as 5 could be absent for Sunday's game, and that to me feels like enough of a difference between winning and potentially losing. So we'll take a look at the injury status of these key players, what the Bears' plan might be to replace them, and how much of an impact that's going to have in Sunday's game. So like we've known for a couple weeks, you know, a guy like Jalen Johnson is out. So we don't necessarily have to rehash that side. But coming out of the game against the Dallas Cowboys on Sunday, a bunch of names popped up on the injury list, and I want to go through each of them over the course of the podcast today. So as Thursday's injury report came out, we now have 2 straight days where TJ Edwards did not practice, Kyler Gordon did not practice, Grady Jarrett did not practice, Colston Loveland did not practice, and Darnell Wright did not practice. We'll also throw in there that DeAndre Swift was limited in both days of practice. And I never want to overreact to just one missed day of practice, but when we start to get back-to-back stacked up here, it's not just giving a guy an extra day off. It's oh no, he's not ready to go right now. And of course, Friday presents one more day for these guys to return to practice and potentially be available to play. But when you start to stack these days, you start to plan for, what's going to happen if they're not available on Sunday? And they could get by if it's just Edwards and Gordon and of course, Jalen Johnson like it was last week. But when we start to add these other names into the mix, all of a sudden it becomes that much harder to win. And I think the individual most important name on that list as far as impacting this matchup against the Raiders is right tackle Darnell Wright. We know last week against Dallas, he got banged up in the game, left. Theo Bennett came in and started for him at right tackle, but filled in for him at right tackle. And then eventually, Darnell Wright came back into the game. So clearly it wasn't the type of injury that, is going to be long-term or need any sort of injured reserve, a placement for short-term. But it is enough that he didn't look right. Wright didn't look right after he came back in, and now he's not practicing so far to start this week. He's generally been a very durable player, and I think even if he just practices a little bit on Friday, that could be enough to still potentially play in this game. But it makes you nervous when Max Crosby is on the other side, because initially we were thinking Max Crosby versus Braxton Jones is going to be the kind of the scary matchup for you up front. But you feel okay, if that's the one you got to prepare for, you can scheme up a little bit and slide protections to that side of the offensive line. You can leave tight ends over there. You can have running backs help over there. There are things you can do to help one offensive tackle versus one great pass rusher. And to Braxton Jones' credit, he had his best game of the season last week against the Cowboys, but the Cowboys didn't have a very good pass rush at all and lacked any kind of consistent, proven dominance on the defensive line. Nothing close to what Max Crosby presents. So if it's just Braxton Jones, because you can trust, your other tackle, Darnell Wright, then you're good to go. But if it's Braxton Jones at left tackle and then a backup at right tackle, all of a sudden, pick your poison. You can't necessarily help out both of them at all times. So you have to just constantly change the protection to where Max Crosby is. That might have to be your approach. I am curious what the Bears' approach will be to replace Darnell Wright if he indeed isn't able to go. Because like we said, Theo Bennett filled in against the Cowboys because Ozzie Trapillo was considered a healthy scratch for the game, and they like Theo Benedict's ability to swing tackle and play either the left or the right side better than Trapillo, who seemed to struggle at left tackle, but they've talked a lot about how he's settling back in better at right tackle. By leaving him there, they're seeing a more natural, comfortable Ozzie Trapillo. So it raises the question, does Ozzie Trapillo offer, a better backup right tackle? But they haven't needed a backup right tackle, so Bennett's been active. But if Wright is inactive, is Ozzie Trapillo their best bet to fill in at start at right tackle? Or do they still say Theo Benedict has been the better option and advanced farther in the competition at left tackle, so will Theo Benedict get the start? That's a real open question for me at this point in the process. And the question also is, would you want Ozzie Trapillo to make his first career start against Max Crosby? I mean, it's not going to be him versus Max Crosby over and over again. They'll likely move him around the defensive line a little bit and get some matchups versus Braxton Jones and some matchups versus Ozzie Trapillo. But that's quite a trial by fire for a rookie who you liked a lot coming out of the draft and think highly of, but first game in the pros against, one of the 5 or 10 best pass rushers in the NFL. Not the easiest, introduction to the league, but you also look at the schedule, and most teams have a really good pass rusher. How often are you really going to face a team that doesn't? I mean, I guess, the Washington Commanders aren't elite in that category after the bye week, if at some point you wanted to get Trapillo in there. But again, Darnell Wright should be back soon, so it's kind of now or never for, do you go with the rookie and just kind of live with it, or is Theo Benedict the all-around more trustworthy option for you there? Either way, I think the game plan is a similar approach of you got to help that guy out, and you got to hope what Braxton Jones did last week against the Cowboys can continue even as the quality of pass rusher against him goes up. And I do think part of it's going to be you might have to have a tight end just follow Max Crosby wherever he is on some plays. If it's a key third down, if Crosby's on the left side, you put the tight end on the left side. If Crosby's on the right side, you put the tight end on the right side, and you double team him because you just have to be able to have answers. It's going to require Caleb Williams and Drew Dahlman to make sure they're really on top of their protections, and getting this pass protection shored up was such a big key for Caleb Williams against the Cowboys, and they can't let the Raiders really disrupt all that. And then you do want to get the running game going here, and they haven't been able to do so with Swift and Monangai, and Swift is limited. We'll talk about him in a little bit. That's a whole other barrier here, but does Benedict or Trapillo give you more than each other in the running game? Does one give you more as a pass blocker? Does one give you more as a run blocker? I thought Theo looked solid in filling in for Darnell Wright. It ended up only being a dozen or so plays in the game against the Cowboys, so it's a little small of a sample size to say this is some great offensive tackle sleeper sitting on the bench. But if Wright doesn't go, we'll get a long exposure to whoever his replacement is in this game. It'll give us a much clearer picture of the Bears' depth at offensive tackle. We should also get a clearer picture of the Bears' depth at defensive tackle, as it looks like at this point, we'll see if Grady Jarrett is able to go, but as he doesn't practice, it looks like they may have to go a little younger on the defensive line. So we'll take a look at how the Bears might handle a similar dynamic of who to play in Grady Jarrett's place on the defensive line next on Locked On Bears. The Locked On Bears podcast is brought to you by our friends at Square. Your favorite neighborhood spots run on Square. There are certain businesses that truly make the neighborhood feel like home, whether it's the local sports bar packed on game days, the coffee shop that knows your order by heart, or the corner deli that's been serving your community for decades. These are the places that bring people together. And when neighborhood businesses thrive, the whole neighborhood thrives. I actually just ran into this at a local bar in my town. I was covering a high school football game last week, and we went into the bar. It's called Lucy's Hideaway, and they had just switched over to a Square system. And the person I was with is a service industry worker, and he noticed too, hey, how do you like the new Square system? And the bartenders were raving about it because they used to all have to punch in their orders at the screen in the back, but now they have those little mobile kiosks they can take with them, and it really cuts down on a lot of the traffic behind the bar and speeds up the whole process for workers and for customers. So it's these kind of innovations that help local spots make neighborhoods feel like home when they run on Square. Square is a proud partner of more than 4 million neighborhood businesses around the world. You can go to square.com/go/LockedOnNFL to learn more. But before you do, go support your favorite neighborhood spot. You'll be happy you did. Square. See you in the neighborhood. Locked On Bears podcast is also brought to you by DoorDash. It's almost the weekend. It's time to look back and crown this week's MVP on Who Delivered, powered by DoorDash. Just like you can win every Saturday with DoorDash Streaks, saving more every time you order. These players delivered when it mattered most. Let's break it down. For the Chicago Bears against the Dallas Cowboys, I got to say, this offensive line and Braxton Jones is someone who stepped up when it mattered the most. No pressures allowed. No sacks, no hits, no hurries. Clean sheet of pass protection from left tackle Braxton Jones on Caleb Williams' blind side. And it was the first game of Caleb Williams' career where he was not sacked. They came through when the pressure was on. Well, really, the pressure wasn't on, but when the pressure was on the offensive line, they came through, so the pressure wasn't on Caleb Williams. And just like Braxton Jones delivered for the Bears, DoorDash delivers your Saturdays with DoorDash Streaks. You save every Saturday you order, so stack it up all season, and you could save up to $250, including $100 in DoorDash credits. Order this Saturday and keep the streak alive. Fuel your game day only with DoorDash. Terms apply. Promo period through November 18th. So we're not sure how the Bears are going to approach the potential absence of Darnell Wright, either a rookie or a younger player that also is lacking in some experience. And I think that's going to be the similar question mark on the defensive line with Grady Jarrett's absence, where the depth chart isn't exactly crystal clear because of how they rotate the defensive tackles around. And I'm curious to see how Dennis Allen and this Bears coaching staff decide their defensive tackle rotation without Grady Jarrett. Because so far this season, we've seen, and I should say again, we don't know for sure that Grady Jarrett is going to miss the game, just 2 days of missed practices. So we kind of got to plan for the possibility that he is not able to go. But so far through 3 games this season, the Bears have kind of done this thing where Grady Jarrett is the starting 3 technique pass rushing defensive tackle over the guard. And then Gervon Dexter's been kind of like the starting nose tackle over the center. But then Gervon Dexter will frequently rotate to the 3 technique pass rushing spot, like when they'll bring in Andrew Billings off of the bench, and he'll play nose tackle, and then Grady Jarrett, and then Gervon Dexter will be the pass rushing 3 technique. And sometimes they'll take Dexter off and they'll bring in Chris Williams as the pass rushing 3 technique. And we kind of get this rotation of a lot of different guys kind of playing different spots on this defensive line so far. And we can't exclude from the conversation now, we saw the NFL debut of Shamar Turner last week against the Dallas Cowboys. And so this then gives Dennis Allen some different options here for who and what is going to be this rotation to replace Grady Jarrett if indeed he is not able to go. Because it was only Shamar Turner's first that he full-time started, something where he played kind of a surprising amount. I would have thought that in his first ever game that it would have been a little bit more limited. Ended up playing more than Chris Williams, the veteran defensive tackle the Bears had traded for last offseason, or last preseason, who had been, kind of the 4th man in this rotation, while Shamar Turner was a product of the Bears having a lead and then maybe having some flexibility to say, hey, we can play the young guy and not worry so much. Like, we'll take, even if he struggles, we can survive that because they've got such a nice lead on the scoreboard that they can say, we've gotten this taken care of, so they can get by with errors he might make. But if Grady Jarrett's going to miss the whole game and they need someone to play a much bigger role, do they trust a rookie in only his 2nd ever game, right? It's kind of like the Ozzie Trapillo conversation. Do you throw a guy out there in a big role right away, or do you say, hey, and throw him out there and kind of live with the ups and downs because it's good for his development? Or do you say, let's go with the veteran that might not have as high of a ceiling, but might be a little bit more reliable and might be able to give us something we feel like we can count on more consistently there? I would guess that the approach we'll see is kind of combination of maybe Andrew Billings takes over as the starting nose tackle, and then Dexter moves over as the starting 3 technique tackle, and then you kind of rotate Chris Williams and Shamar Turner behind them. And so Dexter ends up playing kind of both still, but plays a little bit more of a pass rushing type role. And maybe Shamar Turner plays a little bit more of the nose tackle type role off the bench. And you kind of just find different ways to get those guys all in different areas, as opposed to as opposed to promoting Chris Williams or Shamar Turner to starter, essentially you're starting to, both of your quote unquote nose tackles on the depth chart, but really one of them is playing more of the pass rush role. And then of your two sort of backup pass rushing defensive tackles, one of them is going to have to play some nose tackle to give Gervon Dexter and Andrew Billings some kind of break in there as you kind of rotate all those guys around. So I think they have some different options here, and I don't think it's going to look like a very clean, okay, Grady Jarrett plays, whatever number of 45 snaps a game. And it's not just like you're going to take those 45 and just hand them to Shamar Turner and say, those are yours now, problem solved. It's going to be like, well, Andrew Billings maybe gets, 15 more of those snaps and Shamar Turner gets 10 more of those snaps. And I guess that would leave, the math isn't mathing, but and then, maybe Chris Williams gets 5 more of those snaps and Gervon Dexter gets 10 more of those snaps. You spread them around between the other players trying to absorb that, and you hope that you get a more consistent pass rush on the interior. Because, the secret here is that, or not the secret, but the elephant in the room here is that Grady Jarrett has really struggled through the first 3 games. And his leadership is definitely the most valuable trait he brings to the Bears, and that will be missing. But on the field, I'm not expecting necessarily a huge drop-off in terms of production there, because he only has a couple of pressures so far this season through 3 games. Hasn't been particularly great against the run. He's a good tackler, not missing tackles, but just not necessarily the kind of impact player that the Bears were hoping for from him on the interior. So if somebody like Shamar Turner or Chris Williams can have a big game, could it be even somehow like a net positive against a struggling interior offensive line of the Raiders? We'll see how that ends up playing out for them, but definitely a key injury spot to keep an eye on there. And then the other guy that we'll mention here briefly, added to the injury report this week, is Colston Loveland. We had that big catch against the Cowboys, but that was kind of it. I think he got 30, 31 yards on his one catch up the middle, but then he goes down with the hip injury and doesn't come back. And now he's on injured reserve, or not injured, excuse me, now he's on the injury report. Should be careful there. Now he's on the injury report, not practicing for the first 2 days of practice this week. And you wonder if it's going to be a lot of the Cole Kmet show and not a lot of the, 2 tight end sets that the Bears were hoping to focus a lot of their offense around. It's worth noting Cole Kmet was limited in practice on Wednesday with a groin injury, but full participant on Thursday suggests he should be good to go. But on your Bears tight end depth chart, your number 3 tight end is Durham Smythe, who they used quite a bit against the Dallas Cowboys as the sort of the new number 2 tight end to replace Colston Loveland, but he's just not a very good football player. He hasn't been the last couple seasons in Miami, and really doesn't offer you a ton. He's not a great blocker, not a great receiver, just a very below average tight end that I don't think the Bears would be wise to just take all of Colston Loveland's 35, 40 snaps and just give them all to Durham Smythe and say, plug and play, do the same things you were doing. If I'm Ben Johnson, and certainly I am not Ben Johnson. Ben Johnson knows a lot more about offensive football than I do, but I would be inclined to say, I want to get my best 5 skill players on the field. And Durham Smythe is not one of my best 5 skill players on the field. He might not be one of my best 10 skill players on the field. That might be a little harsh. But when I look at this Bears offensive depth chart, I think if I'm in no particular order, my best skill players, Rome Odunze, DJ Moore, Cole Kmet, 1, 2, 3. Then Colston Loveland, probably 4. Luther Burden, Oldesmead, Zacchaeus are, 5 and 6 there. And then, I forgot about, DeAndre Swift, Kyle Mungai, Devin Duvernay, Ja'Day Walker. Durham Smythe is the worst of the skill players on offense. So if that's the case, if I've got Cole Kmet, Durham Smythe, and maybe they call up Steven Carlson from the practice squad for some more depth, instead of trying to use 2 tight ends, I would just use more wide receivers. I would run a lot more 3 wide receiver sets. It'd be more, instead of giving more playing time to Durham Smythe, I'm giving more snaps to Olamide Zacchaeus and Luther Burden and Ja'Day Walker if he's active and good to go, and maybe even Devin Duvernay, and maybe more 2 running back sets. Get Swift and Mungai on the field at the same time. Or, if heaven forbid Roschon Johnson is able to go and be a factor in this game, give him more snaps. Instead of a second tight end, I'd rather get any of those other players on the field. Sometimes, you got to go 2 tight ends sometimes. You just, certain plays and packages, you need to have that set up. And Smythe isn't going to be abysmal every time he steps on the field. It's just not necessarily the player that's giving you the best chance to win compared to some of the other talent you might have available at the skill positions on your roster. So I think that'll be the Bears' approach there. It'll also be, we'll see. Kyler Gordon is teasing a potential return, but if not, it'll be another game without TJ Edwards at linebacker, another game potentially without Kyler Gordon, and with DeAndre Swift limited, I wonder how that's going to affect the backfield rotation. So we'll take a look at how those players' absences might affect some of the matchups in this game that are going to be kind of head-to-head with a couple of key spots on the Bears defense in particular next on Locked On Bears. The Locked On Bears podcast is brought to you by Mazda. Mazda crafts cars for those who do more than simply move. Because think about it, from footwork to breathwork, athletes sweat all the details. And Mazda brings this same intention to how they craft every model. Mazda delivers confidence with every ride, with more IIHS top safety pick awards than anyone else. You can feel Japanese craftsmanship in every detail, from the metallic accents to available Napa leather upholstery. It helps you make everyday drives feel like anything but, from smooth handling to intuitive controls. With all-wheel drive standard in every crossover, you can drive with confidence through almost any season. Like the players, Mazda sweats every detail, because when you make every move count, impossible becomes irrelevant. Mazda. Move and be moved. So we've known about the absences of Kyler Gordon and TJ Edwards, for the past few weeks, but I think their absences in particular are pivotal in this matchup against the Las Vegas Raiders. And I think the same thing can be true if DeAndre Swift doesn't go, but he's been limited for 2 days, so he might just not be 100% out there. So I guess if we start with Swift momentarily, maybe he can't handle as heavy of a load of carries in this game. So does that mean more carries for Kyle Monangai and maybe actually some carries for Roschon Johnson to get him going in the backfield? Does it mean the Bears maybe opt to try and, call up a running back from the practice squad? They have Britton Brown sitting down there if they just want some extra depth, if they're not sure how well Swift is going to be able to go. I'm curious to see how they split that up because they haven't been able to get the running game going. And if Swift is limited from a mobility speed standpoint, that's kind of the only way he's been generating yards this season. So if he doesn't have the main trait that helps him get some yards and maybe break away for some bigger yards, are you better off just saying, hey, let's get the tough fought earned yards with Roschon and Monangai up the middle? It might not ever rip off the 30-yard screen pass, but if you can get 4.5 consistently on your carries, maybe that can be enough of a running game there to take some pressure off of Caleb in the passing game against the Raiders. But I'm more concerned about the continued presence of backup cornerbacks and a backup linebacker like Noah Sewell in this matchup against the Las Vegas Raiders, because we saw last week the Dallas Cowboys went after Noah Sewell pretty consistently with Jake Ferguson, and a lot of it was throwing short, but still it was a lot of targets his way and asking him to step up and try and make those plays. And we saw in that game, Noah Sewell missed 3 tackles against the Cowboys. He missed 3 in week 1 against the Vikings. He has 7 missed tackles this season, and he has been targeted 11 times, given up 11 catches for 79 yards and a touchdown. He's given up 7.2 yards per reception, giving up a catch pretty much every time, and missing some tackles as a result. And I think they could get away with that against the Cowboys with CeeDee Lamb out and Jake Ferguson just catching checkdowns. But I'm a little bit more worried about Noah Sewell trying to match up with Brock Bowers and maybe even Michael Myers if Michael Mayer if he is healthy enough to go in this game, which is a question mark of their own for the Las Vegas Raiders. Even Bowers has been on the injury report and a little bit less than 100%. I know so far through this week, he's been on the injury report. Again, he was a full participant, though, at Wednesday's practice, and Michael Mayer was a non-participant at Wednesday's practice, and they've been a little bit slow to update their injury report as the week of practice has gone on for them. But assuming Bowers is good to go, they're going to get him matched up with Noah Sewell as much as they possibly can and throw it to him over and over again. And I worry that he's the kind of caliber of tight end that could really take advantage of that and expose the Bears defense up the middle there. And I think from a coverage standpoint, you got to help him out. You can't afford to have that be man coverage almost at single man coverage at any time. You can roll cover 1 and have a middle of the field linebacker kind of help him and double team that a little bit with sort of passing it off between a zone and a man there and mix up your coverages a little bit in that regard. But I just worry, and I would feel a little bit better about it if it was TJ Edwards, and may even feel a little bit better about it if it was Ruben Hippolyte, just because he's faster. Maybe he doesn't quite have the instincts, but just has the speed to keep up with a player like Bowers. But either way, that's going to be a real challenge there. And then for the Raiders, they've been really kind of having a breakout receiver candidate so far in Trey Tucker, who had over 100 yards last season. And I worry about how he's going to match up with the injuries in the Bears secondary, because Trey Tucker's a guy who is a real speed threat there. And we certainly saw, the speed of Turpin last week for the Cowboys blow by Nick McLeod in the slot there. They move Trey Tucker around quite a bit. He plays on the outside mostly, and they like that speed vertical, but they'll move him in the slot and work him across the middle of the field too. But to me, whether it's Nick McLeod filling in for Kyler Gordon or whether it's Nashawn Wright filling in for Jalen Johnson, I don't love the matchup there with Trey Tucker. I mean, he's a legit 4.4 guy. He's only 5'9", 185, so it's not like, it's a physicality thing. It's purely like a speed and route running, getting open type of thing. And I would feel a lot better about Kyler Gordon being able to match up there. Whether it was Kyler Gordon in the slot, or we keep talking on this podcast about the potential for when Gordon comes back, if maybe they move him to the outside and put him in place of Nashawn Wright. Like, kind of a pick your poison of, would you rather have Stevenson, Wright, and Gordon, or Stevenson, McLeod, and Gordon? Because McLeod can play inside and out too, so you can kind of figure out what combination you'd like to do with those guys. But for now, I think we have to keep assuming until we find out otherwise that Kyler Gordon isn't going to be out there. He did post a kind of a teaser Instagram post that maybe could suggest he might be able to return, but the fact that he hasn't been able to practice through the first 2 games, or the first 2 days of practice this week, suggests that maybe he's not able to. But on Instagram, he posted some kind of thing on his story that was like a picture of him about something about Spider-Man and some kind of return. I don't remember the exact language he used, but soon I'm guessing maybe you look at it to say, hey, they got a bye week next week. Maybe you give Gordon and Edwards 1 more week off and not rush them back for a Raiders team that in theory should be beatable, but feels less beatable if you're missing all these guys. If you're missing Edwards and Gordon and Jarrett and Loveland and Wright, that becomes a much, much taller task. Like, if they find a way, so like, say Darnell Wright practices on Friday and he starts at right tackle, and maybe Colston Loveland is limited and you can get a little bit of roll from him, like maybe you can survive with a couple of these guys out. But if all 5 of those guys are out and DeAndre Swift is a little bit limited in the backfield, that's tough against any opponent. I don't think the Raiders are all that good, but the Bears haven't been all that good either, and they found a way against Dallas, and maybe they can find a way against the Raiders, but it's a lot harder to find a way when you're taking the talent that already has been iffy at times and then subtracting even more from that and adding more question marks on the offensive and defensive lines and at tight end that weren't there previously. Like, Ben Johnson and Dennis Allen can mask some weaknesses. I'm not sure they can mask all of them. So we'll keep our fingers crossed for Friday's injury report. But whatever happens, you can be sure we're going to break it down for you right here on the Locked On Bears podcast. So make sure you hit the subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts, because that's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And if you're looking for a second listen today, you can always find out more about the Bears' upcoming opponent by tuning into Locked On Raiders with your boy Q. We talked to him yesterday on the Crossover Thursday podcast, so go listen to that if you haven't. But if you want more analysis on the Bears' opponent, Q is one of the best people we have on the Locked On Podcast Network. You might not know, Q is a national radio host for ESPN. He does ESPN's national radio show at night. Like, he's the late night national radio host for ESPN. Covers the Raiders, but also national sports for the big 4-letter network. Like, he is a legit big cheese and super cool guy. I got to hang out with him a number of times at the Combine and Senior Bowl and stuff. So I love Q and can't recommend checking out Locked On Raiders enough, especially when you can actually glean something about it for the upcoming Bears opponent. But just make sure you come on back on Monday. Tune into Locked On Bears once again for your next opportunity to bear down.